Welcome to the program. I'm Jeff Schechtman. Social media often seems like an element that's been tacked on to our culture. Its fads come and go, and it often seems that things like Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Pinterest, and Snapchat are all fungible and subject to the laws of creative destruction. On the other hand, companies like YouTube and its parent company, Google, often feel like they're deeply integrated into our lives. We search on Google, we learn and can be entertained on YouTube, almost like personal television. They've become like essential utilities to get us through life. As such, they often get less scrutiny for both their influence and their business practices. When Andy Warhol said that everyone would be famous for 15 minutes, he could not have imagined YouTube. That everyone would be able to broadcast themselves to the planet and make money while doing it. More than an add-on to our culture, in many ways, things like YouTube are our culture. Unlike those other social media whose apps come and go, YouTube, on the other hand, represents our culture at its best and its worst. As its CEO, Susan Wojcicki, has said, it's a mirror of who we are. Capturing both this history and its cultural role is my guest, Mark Bergen. Mark is a journalist for Bloomberg News and the author of the new book, Like, Comment, Subscribe: Inside YouTube's Chaotic Rise to World Domination. Mark Bergen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, it's great to have you here. Why isn't there more talk about YouTube? I mean, certainly it's out there. There's a sense of it being accepted. Occasionally there'll be the particular battles or the regulation battles that it engages in. But it certainly seems to get less scrutiny than some of the other social media situations.
That's right. I think you kind of nailed it with this. It functions as utility for a lot of people, right? It is for most people, certainly of a certain age, it's where you go to figure out how to fix your kitchen sink or something wrong with your car, or to find archival footage or do a workout routine. It does not have the same dynamics as a Facebook feed or Twitter. And I think it's sort of it's like the air we breathe in some ways, and so we don't think of it as much. The company's been around now for 17 years, and it joined Google pretty shortly thereafter. So it's not as novel as TikTok, although it functions in a similar way. I also think that, and I write about this in the book, that Google is just in some ways a more mature and savvier company than Facebook and Twitter, and is able to, I think, intentionally stay out of these conversations.
Is that because of the nature of the company and the technology, or is it because it's had better leadership?
I think it's the nature of the company. YouTube it wasn't until 2019 that they actually shared any financial data with Wall Street or the public. And still, they only give us a small amount of information about their business. It's tucked inside Google, which is even tucked inside of Alphabet, their parent company. Google is often criticized in the press and dragged before Congress around privacy, antitrust, a myriad number of issues, and YouTube is a smaller part of its empire, and so just has less visibility. I also think there's something structural about the way that video works. It is, talk to researchers who study, say, like misinformation or kind of other harms about social media, or it's a wider impact. Text-based, like Facebook and Twitter are mostly text. It's easier to analyze. Video is just so complicated, and YouTube is the stat that they've shared now. It's a few years old. It's 500 hours, new footage uploaded every minute. This kind of incomprehensible amount of video footage that is really hard to study, and I think that contributes to this issue.
One of the things that's remarkable that you talk about in Like, Comment, Subscribe is how many battles, though, YouTube has fought, how many times it's had to change and morph in so many ways in order to keep up with sometimes criticism, sometimes regulation.
Yes, the history is rather tortured, and it's a dramatic one and a really fun story to tell. So much of what the decisions that they made, like a lot of their pivotal moments, and I think what separates YouTube a lot from its competitors, and what makes it really interesting to me is that it has this it built this what we call a creator economy. Right? It was the first platform to really pay people to produce material on the internet and pay video producers in 2007. And then, so a lot of the decisions and the crises that the companies face is because every decision they make, whether it's to change a content moderation policy or to outlaw a certain type of speech or to kind of pivot or tweak their algorithmic dials in one direction or another, that has consequences for millions of people who make money off the platform. And millions of people who get often very upset with what YouTube does. And so I think to go back to your first question, there is certainly, if you're a YouTube creator and you make money off the platform, it is central to your life and conversations. And there are a lot of people that have talked about the company for years.
Talk about the people that make money off of it and how unique that was as it evolved.
I mean, early on, a lot of the original YouTubers and then even before the term creators were kind of experimenting with this. They were maybe aspiring filmmakers or comedians or just bloggers, kind of tinkering with this new medium. Didn't have a guarantee of money or even a way to have financial success. I mean, I think the savvy thing the company did was they figured out in order to get people from making videos elsewhere or to continue to upload, they want to share some revenue. And so they began sharing in 2007 with a small group, which became a pretty substantial maybe a decade ago. And then they opened the floodgates to millions of creators and started all whole new categories of content that didn't really exist on TV. So video gameplay is one, beauty, makeup tutorials, kids content, vlogging, things that were relatively cheap to produce. You could produce a lot of footage, and from a small amount, but certainly a small relatively to the overall number of people that are uploading videos, but a pretty substantial number of people have built multi-million-dollar careers off of that.
Talk about when the company first started, the initial battles that it engaged in over copyright, because that really set the stage for so much that would happen later.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, fundamentally, what YouTube was doing for a lot of media companies was, and I have this anecdote from the book, is that Viacom, which was the parent company of MTV and Comedy Central and a host of TV networks, thought of YouTube's business model as they basically you're running a baseball game and the baseball game is free and you just sell hot dogs in the parking lot. They were giving away the media entertainment for free and then running commercials. And there early on there were a lot of problems with pirated footage or footage that came from TV that looked like it was pirated. Viacom sued YouTube for $1 billion. It became this existential crisis for the company and the platform. Right, if they couldn't solve this problem, there was a real threat that traditional media would kind of sue them out of existence. They were able to solve it in part because they built a savvy product called Content ID that was able to upload and identify copyrighted footage that appears on the site and then give the advertising revenue to the copyright holders. They were also successful in the lawsuit in part because they proved that just by looking at a video, you can't identify whether or not it's copyrighted material or if the person who owns that copyright uploads it. And so there was these kind of funny cases where companies like a Viacom company like CBS or Paramount Studios would actually kind of secretly upload their own clips because the marketing teams knew that YouTube was this really powerful tool to get in front of a lot of people.
Talk about the success of that lawsuit, because that really was, just to stay on that a moment, that really was a turning point for YouTube.
Yeah, that's right. I think it certainly proves that it solved an existential problem in the sense they could continue to exist. For Google, it became clear that there now was a commercial path forward for the business. It wasn't. It was more of it had more potential than liability. I think it fundamentally changed the way that the internet works. And I think before then, a lot of TV networks and movie studios were reluctant to put their material online. And then after that was You saw late night TV start to appear the next day on YouTube. Music videos now sort of debut on YouTube. And a lot of movie studios are, set up like Disney will set up its own competing streaming service, but certainly shares a lot of material there. And I think that was because of that lawsuit.
The other aspect is how successful this company has been. When Google bought it for a little over $1.5 billion, people thought that was a huge amount of money at the time. It's so tiny by current standards.
That's right. I think it's up there with Instagram as far as like the savviest acquisitions in Silicon Valley. I think when YouTube has last year in 2021, they made close to $29 billion in advertising revenue. They also make additional money from people who pay for their subscription services, like music service or their TV streaming service. And so they've been the dominant force in the online video for a long time. And are now moving more and more into like over-the-top TV streaming as a potential market.
Mm-hmm. Talk about that current business, trying to get into the TV streaming business.
Sure. The YouTube TV is a product that I think it was maybe 2017 or 2018. And it packages a cable bundle, so you can. I think it's $65 a month now, and effectively works as like a really nice sort of over-the-top TV station and or like a bundle of TV networks. And is like a lot of what YouTube excels at is a pretty seamless viewing experience. I found it kind of marvelous when I've used it as like just automatic DVR and go back and like kind of automatically watch every single NBA playoff game and pause it and move forward. It's sort of just like YouTube itself, right? Everything's on demand and there's no buffering and sort of instantly plays. I think it certainly plays to the company's strengths. It's also importantly not an area where they need to do content moderation, right? They're just, in this sense, like YouTube TV, that they have YouTube.com, but they have ESPN and ABC and all these major networks where a lot of the faults that the companies had, both politically and then on their business, have come from their struggle with content moderation.
One of the areas where there's been a lot of struggles with regard to this is with respect to kids. Talk about that.
Yeah, YouTube really, I struggle to hesitate to use the word accidentally, because I think there was some intention in the way they set up, but they from the get-go, they weren't trying to bring in a young audience. The site was designed as for legal reasons, as for viewers over the age of 13. It was about a decade ago when YouTube switched their algorithms and recommendation system to really prioritize what they call watch time, which is videos that just keep people watching as long as possible. And sort of the inevitable happened there is like that became a huge draw to children and for children's content. And then we had this explosion almost overnight of material on the site that didn't exist before, and a lot of new categories. There were new ways. Some of it was kind of just like what you see on TV or DVDs in the 90s, maybe for kids. Some of it kind of resembled Sesame Street, but a lot of it was something entirely new. Toy unboxing was a really popular category that's effectively just sometimes don't even see the people's faces. It's just a voiceover, or not even a voice. It's just people like unboxing with toys, and sometimes it's sort of been accused of being a 20-minute long commercial. And those videos did phenomenally well and took over the site and became this massive category and really critical for their ads business.
Talk about this notion of watch time, because that really was also a major change for YouTube.
It was a decade ago, and I think it's so important to kind of understand, especially a company like Google, which is very much a computer science company. The decisions they make are driven by the engineering metrics. And so the metric for YouTube for its first 5 years was we're going to prioritize videos in the search system and the recommendations that get the most views. And they saw a problem there with what we call clickbait. Effectively, videos, you may click on a video, you kind of enticed with the headline, or someone shares it, and then you realize quickly that it's not for you, and you immediately jump away. In order to solve that, YouTube then switched over to basically videos that could keep people engaged for as long as possible. And that had profound impact. I mean, that basically took off, launched their business really, and reached a goal they set that same year for 1 billion hours of daily viewing around the world, which, from inside the company, they still saw themselves as a very small underdog next to television. Right? TV at the time had maybe 4 or 5 hours of Americans' daily time, and so in YouTube's mind, they were just trying to eat into this market, and really they saw themselves as a much more expansive and interesting, and in many ways, kind of giving people more opportunity than traditional TV in Hollywood.
As television itself has gone more towards streaming and on demand, has that been a fear for YouTube in terms of its business model?
I think so. I mean, in the sense that so much of their business team is their objective is to get they're kind of be as expansive as possible to get as much TV and traditional media. I mean, I think ideally YouTube would love Disney Plus just to live on YouTube rather than live on Disney Plus. And in the sense of they are really competing for eyeballs and for like the time in the day. And so YouTube is competing with Facebook and Twitter and TikTok, but they're also competing with Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Prime. I mean, at one point they launched an actual strategy around subscription service that is now called YouTube Premium. They had an originals program that was similar to Netflix and Amazon, where they and Apple TV, where they were producing their own original shows, mostly starring YouTube creators. They've actually shut that down and moved, kind of let those companies fight it out for paying subscribers, and seem to be much more comfortable with their advertising business.
Talk about how the advertising business was shaped by this notion of watch time, and the longer people would stay with something, the more effective it was for advertisers.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, initially it seemed counterintuitive in the sense that if the advertising business works like mostly what they call pre-roll ads, those ads that pop up before a video starts. And so if the longer videos, you're going to have fewer times to run ads. And I think in the onset, actually, their business dropped a little bit for that reason. But over a course of years, it became very clear that this was the way that YouTube got people coming back to the site on a regular basis and just watching much more YouTube than they would compared to TV. And the pitch to advertisers was always, the audience is here on YouTube, and you can get not only just a bigger audience and maybe more engaged and kind of leaning in a way that they're not on TV, but there's just this, what YouTube gives advertisers is this massive expanse of long tail of topics and interests that you would not be able to find on television. And so if you're skiing enthusiast, and you can easily just watch hours and hours of videos on YouTube about skiing. But ski apparel, that's like a very clear, desirable customer for you. And YouTube and Google makes it incredibly easy to reach them.
It does seem that the decisions that YouTube has made, even in times of crisis, have been more carefully measured, more carefully thought out than a lot of other social media companies that have been more reactive in some respects, or more interested in chasing the next shiny object without really looking deeply into what might be ahead. Is that true?
I'd say yes and no. I think YouTube, by its nature, moves a little more slowly, in part because the consequences that it has with creators. And so there have been some pivotal moments where, I think there's certainly people, and I talk about this in the book, people inside the company wish that they had moved more quickly, but the leadership was reluctant to say, make difficult moderation decisions, because they knew that would have impact and could potentially cut off people's revenue. I think YouTube tends to act when they were forced from advertisers. So their most decisive decisions came not from even external pressure or even internal ones necessarily from like politicians or staff members, but when their advertisers boycotted the site in 2017 over extremist videos and inappropriate content. And then you saw the company quickly snap into action. And it did so again when they have a ad boycott over children's issues, and then they made some major changes when they were regulated by the Federal Trade Commission. So I think in part that they've been a little savvier on certain moves than say Facebook, and Facebook is much more willing to kind of be openly antagonistic towards regulators and towards the press in a way that YouTube is not. But I think some of it's just by virtue of the fact that YouTube is so large and the decisions they make, they have to balance the interests of viewers and advertisers and its creators, and as well as now regulators.
What are the regulatory hurdles that YouTube might face in the future?
There's the one that they're still chiefly worried about is this old problem of theirs is copyright. It's copyright management. It's in Europe in particular. There was a new proposal around making it more difficult and to do sort of for YouTube to continue to operate with its copyrights management system, and to make platforms like YouTube more liable for copyright infringement. They fought really hard and actually kind of got their big YouTube stars to come out and make videos against that legislation. There is restrictions on ad targeting and privacy regulated with from the FTC around data collection of children that's kind of dented their advertising business. I think around the world they're deeply concerned about antitrust violations. Like Google is facing antitrust cases in the U.S. and elsewhere in the world. Concerns about how companies will sort of what they will do with the future of liability for social media platforms, as well as what we're increasingly seeing in big countries like India, where YouTube's biggest country. The government is kind of having a much heavier hand and forcing YouTube to take down videos and content from often from opposition, from political opposition or critics of the government. And I think that's a problem that YouTube's going to increasingly face.
And yet they really are trying to navigate their way through all of these separate countries.
Navigate their way with as much of a kind of a universal policy as possible. I think that's something that is really interesting about YouTube, is that they want to make decisions that can have like a blanket policy across the world, which is very hard to do and has always been hard to do, and I think going to be much harder to do as many countries try to regulate the internet in a different way. But YouTube really struggles with this idea of they're going to treat one video or one market and country differently than another.
And have they been successful in that?
I mean, they, like Facebook, have put Donald Trump's YouTube channel in an indefinite suspension, which is, as far as I know, is the only channel in that purgatory. I think they've certainly struggled with how to handle Trump and Trumpian politics. Mm-hmm. I think they've talked about this in the books. They've starting in 2017, YouTube cracked down extremely hard against ISIS and Islamist extremists. They did not apply a similar, and their employees in the company notice this. They did not apply similar policies and stringent sort of just outright bans, as well as like really reducing the spread of videos to other forms of extremism. And I think that's now changing after several tragedies involving white supremacists and pressure from outside and pressure from the company. So that's something that the company has struggled with for a long time and probably will continue to do so.
What are the threats that TikTok poses to YouTube at this point?
Yeah, great question. TikTok is a really new threat to YouTube, not just because it's incredibly popular. It's where a lot of like young teenagers and 20-somethings spend a lot of their time. But YouTube has faced that with Vine. They faced that with Facebook to a certain extent, and Instagram. But those platforms apps were never able to pay creators, really. And Instagram has tried many times, but most influencers who make money on Instagram make it through outside brand deals. They don't get it directly from the company. TikTok has started to do that, and YouTube just responded earlier this month, and is now they've introduced a feature called Shorts. It's basically a TikTok copycat, and they're starting to pay creators to make those. And I think that just shows that the company really sees this as not just a concern for their viewers, but also for talent.
Is VR a threat to YouTube, or is that something YouTube is looking to the future with?
They've had Google and has had various attempts at VR. They kind of scaled back those programs, I think, in part because maybe rightly know that it's many years away, right, if it ever comes. I do think that YouTube has invested enough to make, they have like a VR viewing experience. Certainly like Facebook is trying with their own video product, but it's hard to imagine a world in which if we're wearing VR headsets, we want to watch a video, we're not going to turn to YouTube just because no other platform has such a wide breadth of a library of material.
Can you see YouTube or Alphabet, I guess, spinning off YouTube at some point as a separate company?
It's hard for me to imagine. I think it doesn't seem like the Department of Justice is going to force Google. I would imagine that Google would not do that unless they were forced to. It's so critical to Google, so critical to YouTube's ads business and to its machinery. Its recommendation system runs on Google's. Using Google's AI research, its ads are sold by Google salespeople. It is tied intimately with the mother company.
And what is the biggest thing you would think that people don't know or don't understand about YouTube that they would find surprising?
That's a really good question. In some sense, it's just the absolute enormity. The thing that shocked me, and when I show people that they're shocked too, is if you go look at the most popular YouTube channels right now by traffic, they are almost all children's channels, nursery rhymes and videos and channels starring children and made for young kids, and they get something like 300 million, 500 million views per week. It just it sort of blows away your concept of what's popular on media. And so I think, and that's just, and then you look outside of the U.S. too, like in India, YouTube has almost half a billion monthly users, more than Twitter has across the world. And so I think those are stats that just kind of, I don't think people really appreciate how large and significant YouTube is.
Mark Bergen, his book is comment, subscribe, Inside YouTube's Chaotic Rise to World Domination. Mark, I thank you so much for spending time with us.
Thank you so much. It was really great.
Thank you.